Hi, hope you're doing well today. Hope you're staying healthy and positive. I'm just enjoying a bit of fresh air on my front porch if you're wondering where I am. And I just wanted to talk about a couple of things today in this short video. The first is fear and the second is hope. And a lot of people are experiencing fear at the moment, or at least anxiety and perhaps confusion. And hope is a way of combating that. Fear is kind of understandable at times like this for a lot of people, but it's not necessary because hope can combat that fear. And a lot of people have been putting out messages which have been great. Hopefully you've been able to see some of these messages about faith overcoming fear, and you might be feeling that you're not in faith, that you're struggling with the concept of faith, and the Bible tells us in Hebrews 11 verse 1 that faith is being sure of what we hope for, certain of what we do not see. So in a sense, hope is a kind of precursor to faith. So I hope that as I talk about hope a bit just now, that will encourage you if that's where you're at. And a way of describing or defining fear is false evidence appearing real, using the letters of the word, and that might be a helpful way of thinking about fear. And I want to give an illustration of that from my life, an instance I was reminded of just the other day, where I was very fearful, became very scared. Happened when I was 18. I was on a rafting trip with my dad in Canada, on the Canadian-Alaskan border. It was a kind of guided, organised rafting trip. We weren't just kind of heading out into the wilderness on our own, but it was proper wilderness. We were 10 days on the river, camping along the banks of the river. And the instance I wanted to share happened on the first night, as we sat around the campfire. Three kind of things happened three kind of bits of information were shared as we sat around that campfire that basically caused my anxiety to rise and caused me to become quite fearful that night. The first one was that it was shared with us that the area that we were kind of rafting through, the mountain range that this river cut through, was one of the highest concentrations of grizzly bears in the entire world, which was information I'd been aware of prior to our trip, and certainly kind of made me sit up and think. And then also the second kind of piece of information was various members of the group, and we had kind of 3 guides who were all Canadian, and also other people that were kind of experienced in rafting and done lots of camping in the wilderness. They all shared various grizzly bear stories, including one of our guides who had fought off grizzly bears with kind of oars from his raft or his kayak, and it was pretty graphic. And they all kind of then shared their theories about what's best to do if a grizzly bear attacks you, and these theories were pretty varied and sometimes contradictory, and so that didn't leave me feeling very confident. Kind of made me kind of pretty anxious, having heard these experiences and also these theories. And then the third thing was a couple of Americans on our trip from Oregon, pretty experienced rafters, hunters, camping in the wilderness, and they then queried our Canadian guides as to what kind of firearms they had with them to protect us from the grizzly bears. And it kind of would be the Americans asking this, wouldn't it? They wanted to know how well tooled up our guides were with firearms. And the Canadian guides kind of turned around and said, no, we don't carry firearms, we've got pepper spray and knives, it's all good. Yeah, the reaction from these 2 American guys, they were pretty startled, pretty shocked by this piece of information, which then kind of just transferred onto me in terms of causing my level of anxiety to rise even further. So I went to bed that night feeling pretty anxious, and then woke up in the middle of the night, and fear properly set in at that point, as I could hear the kind of soft pitter patter of the rain on the side of our little 2-man tent that I was sharing with my dad, and this noise and the anxiety and the kind of thoughts going around in my head made me basically believe that there was I could imagine, I was just imagining this huge grizzly bear walking around our tent, and I got to this point where I could almost see the shape of this grizzly bear just prowling around our tent, no one else's, just ours, and the pitter-patter of the rain was just enough noise that I just imagined this sound, this noise, this bear outside, and I thought this is going to break through our tent any minute and have us for breakfast. And I thought, well, I've got to wake my dad up. So I thought the best way to wake my dad up, this is what I did, was I didn't want him to make any noise and startle the bear that I was convinced was outside our tent. So I clamped my hand round his mouth and nose so he didn't make any noise, and kind of shook him at the same time, at which point my poor old dad woke up kind of pretty startled, his eyes bulging, and I kept my hand clamped around his mouth and his nose as I whispered into his ear, "There's a grizzly bear outside our tent." At which point, he sat up with a start, and I was sort of motioning him not to make any noise, and he then sat up and listened for a few minutes, and he then shook his head and was looking at me and shaking his head, and, "Oh, I can't hear anything, there's nothing out there, this is just in your imagination, you need to go back to sleep." And at that point there was a sense of relief as I kind of started to process the fact that I had just made this up, and this was just my imagination playing tricks on me. And it took me a few minutes just to kind of calm down and for the fear to subside. And it had just been, the anxiety and the fear in my mind, and then made me think that this bear was outside our tent. And it was got to this point where I was just convinced, but it was just my mind playing tricks with me. And so I went back to sleep eventually, and when we got up in the morning, I scurried out of my tent, and there were no signs of any bear, no paw prints which would have been there if a bear had been there, given it had been kind of raining in the night, soft ground. And so that had just been me becoming fearful with the information that my mind had then used. And that's often how fear can manifest itself in our minds, and cause us to get into a state of fear and panic and confusion. And a way of combating that and combating any fear that we face is just to set our minds on hope. And I just want to read a couple of verses from Hebrews on hope, and just to encourage you, lift you up and build you up with this. So just going to turn to this in Hebrews chapter 6 and read this out of the New Living Version of the Bible. So verse 18 of chapter 6 in Hebrews: "So God has given both his promise and his oath. These two things are unchangeable, because it is impossible for God to lie. Therefore we who have fled to him for refuge can have great confidence as we hold to the hope that lies before us. This hope is a strong and trustworthy anchor for our souls. It leads us through the curtain into God's inner sanctuary. Jesus has already gone there for us. He has become our eternal high priest." And so as we think about hope, and this is kind of what I call a kind of hope sandwich in these verses, in that it's that famous phrase in the middle there of hope is an anchor for our souls. And our soul is our kind of, that's our thoughts and our emotions, and that's where fear can take root, as I shared in that story just then. It takes root in our kind of emotions and our thoughts, but hope is an anchor for our souls. And in these verses kind of gives us a great illustration, this hope sandwich that I'm talking about, in that just before that phrase, hope is an anchor for our souls, it talks about how God is faithful. God's promises don't fail. God can't lie. So his promises, and he is completely trustworthy. And so that's the kind of one half of this hope sandwich. God's faithfulness is the fact that he can't lie. His promises are yes in Christ. And then the second part is that Jesus has gone ahead of us. He's made a way through his death and resurrection. He's made a way for us to enter into God's inner sanctuary, God's presence, and it says that he's our high priest. He's made the sacrifice for us. He's gone ahead of us and made the way. So that's the other half of the hope sandwich. Or you could think of it as an anchor. An anchor typically has kind of two prongs that come out of it. Two kind of sections that curve out of the main stem of the anchor, and that's what kind of digs into the ground, or clings or fixes onto around a rock to make the anchor work. And let's kind of think of these two things: God's faithfulness and his promises, the fact that he can't lie, and then the fact that Jesus is our high priest who's gone ahead of us and done everything we need to receive hope, faith, confidence. And so I just want to encourage you with that. Hope as an anchor for our souls. Hope in a worldly sense is just wishful thinking, isn't it? A lot of times we can just fall into the trap of hope being kind of an idea of wishful thinking, but in a biblical sense, kind of hope we have in Christ is a confident expectation, and a confident expectation, much more than just wishful thinking. And that leads us to faith as well, which is I term faith as a kind of certain and concrete conviction of things we do not see. So certain concrete conviction of things we do not see, but hope comes before that, and that is a confident expectation. And I just want to encourage you with that. And we just want to bless you, and just really hope that we can stand in hope through this time. So have a great day. Speak to you soon.